This lens costs $4,400, while this lens costs about $800. They're both cinema lenses. They have the exact same T-stop. If you're not familiar with T-stops, very similar to f-stops. But is it really worth it for the $3,600 upcharge going from the DZO Film Vespid 35mm T2.1 to the Carl Zeiss 35mm CP3 T2.1. Let's get into it. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to compare the similarities and differences between these two lenses. I was fortunate enough to be able to rent one of these lenses, and I own the other lens, and I was able to compare the two to see if the differences are really worth it. We always hear about these high quality cinema lenses and how expensive they are and how they're so crisp, sharp, all the things that you want. But is that really true? The number one thing right away that I noticed between using the T2.1 of the Carl Zeiss as well as the T2.1 of the DZO Film is actually that the DZO Film Vespid has a better build quality. Even though the actual cost of the lens is cheaper, I personally feel like the build quality is better. Personally, I feel that the way that the gears move on both the focus throw as well as the T-stops honestly are a lot nicer than what I felt when I was using the Carl Zeiss 35mm CP3s. Now, the 35mm CP3s are not necessarily a bad lens in any way, shape, or form, but I did feel like the build quality for the level of price was a lot cheaper than what you would get from something like the DZO Film lens. It was a plastic housing, and the lens itself was huge. I mean, it felt like I was holding a football compared to a normal size lens. Not that that's a bad thing, and shockingly, it was actually lighter to be holding the Zeiss versus the DZO Film. Now, if you're someone like me who's a solo filmmaker, you shoot handheld a lot, having a lighter lens isn't always the best thing. I know a lot of people want lighter packages so you can run on gimbals and different things like that, but when it comes to stability, the heavier your camera rig, the easier it is to get nice camera stability, especially when you're shooting handheld. So I personally prefer the build quality of the DZO Film 35mm. And again, it shocked me knowing how expensive the CP3 actually is. Let's go ahead and just get this out of the way. The image quality. The image quality between the two lenses definitely differs, but it differs in a way that you wouldn't think. I personally really like the image quality of both of them, and I was quite shocked to see how the image quality of the CP3 actually differed from the DZO Film Vespid 1. Now, again, I own the Vespid 1s. I'm very familiar with them. I was a little less familiar with the CP3s, but only heard about them. The image quality that we get from any Zeiss lens is pretty standard. We know that it's going to be sharp. We know that it's going to be something that we can rely on. That's not to say that the DZO Film isn't something we can rely on. But the thing that blew my mind the most was the highlight roll-off. I know, I've talked about this before in other videos, but the highlight roll-off of the CP3s, I think definitely take the cake. I put that lens on my camera and I'm shooting on a Sony a7 IV for all of the shots that you can currently see. And it was almost like I unlocked a new realm of camera. It felt like I was using a Venice or something that really has an extreme dynamic range. I think one of the craziest things about getting into cinema lenses, especially as a solo filmmaker who came from using mostly photo lenses prior to getting into cine lenses, was the way that highlight roll-off is handled between different lenses. Whenever you hear different YouTubers going over camera specs and they're talking about the dynamic range of a camera, while that does really matter, the one thing I think that's not covered as much is how the lens choice in particular determines how that highlight roll-off is displayed. So while the highlight roll-off might be better on something like a Venice, on something like one of those red cameras, all those things are great. But it's really cool to be able to see that I can just change the lens and get way more highlight roll-off. I can basically see all the details in the brightest parts of the image and the shadow, lowest parts of the image all at once. I thought that it was just up to the camera sensor, but really when you have good glass on your camera, it makes a world of difference. The DZO Film, even though it might not have as great a highlight roll-off as the CP3s, I do feel like it renders skin tone better. Why do I say this? There's just a nice warm look that you get with the Vespid 1 set. It's appealing to the skin tone. It doesn't detract from the overall image, but the skin tones that come out of the Vespid 1s are something that are unmatched. I've shot with subjects who are melanated like myself and those who are not. And no matter what, When I put that Vespid 1 on my camera, I feel like I always get perfect skin tones, even when going into the editing process and color grading. It's so much easier to get the look that I'm going for with that Vespid 1. Now, this is not to say that the skin tones on the CP3 were bad. They were just more neutral. They weren't that warm tone. They didn't make things feel more cinematic like I would want them to feel. Again, not saying the lens overall wasn't cinematic. The skin tones just didn't have that nice oomph to them that I usually like to see. Who are these lenses for? If you are a solo filmmaker versus someone who is working with a team, I think it's going to differ which lens choice you go for, as well as what you're actually shooting. The CP3s, I think, are more clinical, as you might hear other YouTubers describe. But by clinical, I think that, in my opinion, means it's just more neutral in color and sharper overall. Not to say that the DZO films are not sharp, it's just that where they're sharp seems to differ. I felt like using the 35mm CP3, everything was sharp. Whether it was the actual person that was in focus, the details on the highlights, the shadows, any and everything in the image was sharp. But it wasn't the same sharpness that I would notice from a photo lens. It felt more like the sharpness that I would see from something of a vintage lens, but hard to describe, almost like it was everywhere, but it was still giving a good roll off and not overly sharp, not overly correct. Now, when it comes to the DZO film Vespid 1s, I've shared this before in previous videos, I feel like the center of the image is the sharpest, while the edges of the image are a little less sharp. I personally like that look even more because it feels more natural. It just feels like that's how we actually see, and that's actually more cinematic in my opinion. I personally, if I had to choose between these two lenses for the type of work that I do as a solo filmmaker, I would definitely stick with the DZO film lens. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't have use cases for the CP3, but I felt like for the price point and what I'm actually getting from the lens, there's a little bit of a discrepancy. And I actually have another lens I want to compare this CP3 to, and I'll follow up with a second video talking about that here pretty soon. But overall, I really enjoyed that CP3. I think that it is a lens I could see myself purchasing if I had an extra $4,000 just laying around. But again, for what you're getting from the differences between these two lenses, I still feel like the DZO film lens wins out as far as a great quality lens for a great price point. Now, as I said, if you are not solo filmmaking, if you're working with a team, if you need something to look a little bit more neutral, I think that going with those CP3s might be the way to go. Again, higher price point, but something that you can rely on. Again, not overly sharp everywhere, but sharp enough everywhere that it looks really great and still cinematic, but not too sharp that it looks like a photo lens and something that doesn't fit in your workflow. Last thing I'll say is that I didn't get a chance to actually test out bokeh. If you guys have been watching and noticing throughout this entire video, all the B-roll footage is coming from Disney. I took my kids on a trip to Disney for their birthdays earlier this month, and while it was an absolute blast, I was able to sneak away for a bit and grab a lens just to be able to test it, but I only had 24 hours with it, so I took it with me to Disney, tried to test it on a couple different things, and then I had my wife model for me as far as being able to tell skin tone differences and so forth. So let me know what you guys think about the differences between these two lenses, if you'd pick up one versus the other. Again, price point does have a decent factor in your decision between the two, but let me know which image you prefer more. And honestly, if you do like the CP3s more than you like the Vespid 1s. Now, it would be interesting to compare the Vespid 2s to the CP3s, so we'll see if we can do that in a later video. But again, if you guys like the video, be sure to comment down below. And though this video wasn't sponsored at all by DZO, I do have a discount code with DZO. It's code BJones. If you type that in when you're checking out with DZO Film, you'll save a little bit on checkout, and overall, I absolutely love their products, so something I would definitely consider doing. Anyways, guys, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.